Wait, no.
Oh, hang on. Turn this off. Okay, should I try it again? From
Yes, are we recording?
We are.
Hello, good morning.
There it is. Okay. See, now I'm nervous. Welcome to the True North Podcast. What did I say? No, I know what it...
We're two friends.
Yes.
Meet once a month.
Yes.
To discuss all things.
Wholeness and healing.
Oh, yes.
For mind, body, and soul. From the spiritual to the metaphysical to the downright practical, so that you can find and follow your true north. I'm Abby. This is Ryan.
Are we going to keep that? I love it.
I don't know. I just feel like no matter what we want to do, that's just what's going to happen.
Okay, that works. And we're back. Part two
of this next sitting. I called them sittings before because we are sitting. And
we
this
are
is a sitting.
That's very British how you said that.
Is it? We are sitting. They do pronounce their T's.
Yes. So we were on the subject of anger when we left part one.
Your anger.
My anger. Yes, my anger. But you were asking about it. So I'm curious because you said you wanted to talk about it as well. So
I want to talk about your anger.
Oh, you want to talk about my anger?
Yes, because you mentioned that you were going through that and dealing with it. I'm like, that would be really good for the podcast. But I do have one question that came up while you were talking before that I didn't want to say and derail where you were going.
Okay.
You talked about you needing to forgive yourself.
Yes.
But you did not talk about what you did wrong. We talked about making yourself believe that things are your fault. Mm-hmm. So is the forgiveness just... Where does that... What do you need to forgive yourself for?
I didn't want to say that on the podcast. No. I could talk about it. But I was thinking on our quick break that this is the point that I did not make. When I learned to stay in my own business, that's when it forces me to look and realize that I am angry at myself. Because if I'm in your business and I get out of my business, when I look at it in terms of anger, I'm going to stay angry and I'm going to just find resentment there. Mm-hmm. So that's, I think, a point I didn't make because I mentioned that when I went through coaching school, that's when I learned about the 3 types of business. And I guess for a practical tool, a way that, like, if you're trying to work on yourself, a way to do it is to constantly ask yourself, when you find yourself suffering, whose business are you sitting in? Are you sitting in your own? Are you sitting in the business of the other person or in universe or God's business? Because most of the time we're sitting in other people's business. When we're worried about what other people think about us, when we are worried about whether that person's going to be angry, how they're going to respond, we are sitting in their business. We're trying to control how they are going to respond to us. And that is never going to work. It's a losing battle. So going back to sitting in my business, that's when I realized I have to forgive myself. And so your question is, what am I forgiving myself for? I am very angry that I've not stood up for myself. Going back to, I will just say whatever you want to say to be agreeable and to stay safe and secure. I am in a position in my life where I don't need to do that anymore to stay safe, but I'm still doing it. And I should know better. Go back to shooting on myself. I should know better. I have the tools. I have the awareness. I know how I should be working on myself, and yet even though I'm very aware that I'm allowing people to kind of steamroll me, I'm doing it. It's happening. And so the anger came back on myself as just, I'm now angry at myself that I'm allowing it to happen, and now I'm angry at myself because I just projected that anger on you and tried to make it your fault. This all comes back to me. If I stood up for myself in the first place and I stayed in my true north, then I wouldn't be angry. I would see it differently. So that's... I don't want to share too much. There's still a lot that I'm actually trying to process, and I'm very private.
Right.
But... yeah, I'm angry because I have not used my voice to stand up for me and to stay in my true north and live in my true north. And it does piss me off because that's what I'm trying to that's how I'm trying to change the world. I'm trying to get everybody else to live in their true north.
Right.
And yet I can't do it myself. So then I feel like a hypocrite.
Right.
So
then there's the primary emotion, and then there's a secondary emotion, which is the emotion you feel about the primary emotion, right?
Yes.
And so I feel like your anger is the secondary emotion, where you have an event, you don't stand up for yourself, and then you review it and you replay it, and then you feel the anger about how you played out.
And then that turns into shame.
Right.
That turns into a lot of shame of, you know, I can't believe you did that. How come you couldn't? How is it that you're so angry at that other person? That's not fair. Why would you? I don't know. It's a lot of Figment. My lizard goes crazy with the shame triggers.
So what would it look like for you to have compassion for yourself in those moments?
Thank you, Coach Ryan, because yes, I do need to get back, because I'm full on in it. So anything you want to throw back at me, please do, because I'm full on in it. In fact, on our break, I was, shaming myself in the bathroom. So,
oh my God, Abby.
Compassion. How can I have compassion for myself? I do need to remember that, I was going to say, I do need to remember that I'm doing the best I can with what I have available. But I don't know that that's entirely true, because I know what I have available and I'm not using it. But the question is why? I don't know the answer to that yet. I think I'm still digging through the why. Why have I found myself in this place, even though I know I have better available to me? How do I have compassion for myself? That's tricky.
I was about to say, you did not actually answer the question.
I know, I did not. I did not answer it, because I don't think I have compassion for myself right now. But
no, you don't.
I need to. I need to. This in podcast radio wave land, this is not good. Silence is not good.
No, this is amazing.
But I know that I'm supposed to embrace the silence, so I am embracing it. But it's touching on some emotions, so trying to fight back some tears. Let's see, compassion on myself.
Would it help if I cried first? Because I can totally I can turn it on.
Can you?
I can think about just about anything.
Compassion on myself. I'm struggling with that. I don't know. Gosh, you stumped me.
Well, what would you say to me if I were saying the things you said? Like if I was in that position and I was telling you that this is what I was dealing with.
Flip it on you. Okay.
How would you coach me through that?
I would probably first challenge, do you really know that you have more? Or are you just saying that because you think you have more?
Or like you're supposed to have more.
Yeah.
Like I should have more.
Mm-hmm. Why? Why do you think you should have more? Just because you're a life coach? Just because you're aware of this? My therapist said to me the other day, you're very aware. I'm like, yes, I may be aware. I just don't know what to do with it. Yes, I am very aware. But that doesn't necessarily mean that I know any different in this moment. Maybe I am doing the best I can with what I have available in this very moment. Maybe you do. I don't know. I'm all in knots in my stomach right now, so I'm not really thinking clearly.
Do you want me to save you?
Sure.
Okay.
Yes.
I have a curiosity, and this is like you mentioned this, but it's more of a service thing. We talked about Ray Ron, and how Ray Ron is a part. It's a version of me from the past, right?
Yes.
You talk about Figment, but Figment is a he when you talk about him.
Yes.
So it doesn't sound like Figment is a previous version of Abby.
No.
So what is Figment? It's your version of Ray Ron. That's the negative self-talk and the little lizard brain trying to protect you and keep you safe. But what is Figment and why is he a he?
Ryan, this is what I love about you. is because you don't miss anything. There are things that you
might be
so
the only
perceptive
person who thinks that.
You are so perceptive to things. So, first of all, Figment is a Disney character.
What?
Yes, I think in the 80s, he's a little purple dragon with like a orange belly, perhaps. I have a keychain of him. And when I went to Disney World as a kid, and he's called Figment of the Imagination.
What?
There was a cartoon, and I used to watch it, and then I went to Disney World, and he doesn't exist anymore.
Right,
so
I've never heard of
look
this.
up Figment. And I loved him. And the crazy thing is I still love Figment.
Disney character.
The Disney character, but I also love the idea of my own Figment because this might be a foretray, but I love to suffer. That sounds terrible, but
It's definitely a fourth.
I love to suffer. Like,
Right.
I'd rather sit in suffering than be happy. Which is such an odd statement to say, but
Unless you're a
anybody-
four, and that makes total sense to
Yes.
fours. People talk about this leg pain I have, and I'm like, here are all the great benefits of it. Now I can relate to everybody else who's suffering in the world. Like
Yes.
it's something that I'm quite enjoying in a weird way.
It's comforting.
Yep.
And it's knowing.
Mm-hmm.
It's just very secure. I know how to operate on that plane.
Mm-hmm.
So in a way, I think that's why I love Figment. It sort of feeds that comfortableness to me. But why is he male? I think what you're touching on, which maybe I haven't put two and two together before, is that I do have a problem with the male species, which I have not really dealt with or acknowledged. And so
But you have a lot of anger there.
I do. I have a lot of anger. I have a lot of shame, and I have a lot of worthiness wrapped up in masculinity.
Right.
I'm not even just going to say males, just masculinity in general. In fact,
Right.
I can handle the feminine side very well, but that's the one area that I have no balance between masculine and feminine. And it's because I am very weak when it comes to masculine energy. And so I think Figment is a male because males very much trigger all of those things for me. Shame, insecurity, isolation, worthiness. And so in my mind, it just sort of made sense that it would be a male because pretty much, wow, this is vulnerable and very honest, but most men can bring me to my knees in shame. Even in an off-the-cuff comment and from a stranger that I don't know will send me into a shame spiral. So that's something that I am very aware of.
And women don't have that effect on you.
No, even strong women.
Interesting.
Yeah. Strong women, sometimes it'll start to trigger, but then it's weird. I can separate it and I can see them from their perspective and why they're showing up that way. Which is how I want to operate in all ways. Like if you're coming at me very strong and very aggressive, there's a reason for that. And I will, if you're a female especially, I will unpack that and I will walk in your shoes for a while to figure out why you're doing that. And then it makes sense to me. And then I'm staying in my business, but I'm also compassionate to how you're showing up. I struggle doing that with a man, which is interesting why then the universe gifted me with a son.
A boy, yes, that's the first thing I thought about.
There's a lesson I need to learn in that.
Right.
Yes, there is. And that's why he's already been my greatest teacher. And I truly believe
And that's why.
he's here to help me find that balance. But again, another long answer, but that I think is why Figment is male.
I was just curious.
Yeah.
I think that's all my questions.
Okay, yeah, so I do. I'm in the midst of processing and unpacking all of my anger
And shame.
Right, so I feel like I'm all over the board and don't have an answer. I feel like I'm sort of leaving this open-ended, but it's certainly up for discussion in the future because it is something that I want to work on. This is not standard operating procedure, nor do I want it to be.
Right. It's super scary and difficult. Well, that's why that's my favorite time to ask these questions, because if it was after the fact and it was all just neatly packaged with a bow on top, like, here's how this thing ended, well, then that's
so true.
Not really something helpful to everyone who's in the middle of it right now.
Yes, I had another thought. And I've lost it.
Oh, man!
I know.
Well, you know what's going to happen is we're going to be talking about something else, so you're going to go, oh, that's the thought.
Yes.
If it does, you have to just interrupt whatever we're talking about, because if you don't, you'll lose it again.
Probably. Okay, so we are going back to debriefing the pilot episode.
The pilot. Did we set the timer?
Yes, we did.
Okay, good. So, giving myself permission to be what I am apart from what other people are. And my therapist helped me to find boundaries, but the only boundary I was really looking for was where I ended and the rest of the world began. And then you said, well, you got out of your way and started being in your business. I'm paraphrasing. Your hysterectomy idea. I wanted to play that because that is gold.
Thank you. I love this idea. See, this is, self-compassion. Ooh, that was really loud. I slapped my leg because I had an epiphany. Self-compassion. I just had a hysterectomy.
Oh, yes!
I just had a hysterectomy, whatever that means. But I need to be gentle with myself.
Yes. Ladies and gentlemen, she didn't actually just have a hysterectomy, but to understand where that sentence came from, I'm going to play you this clip from our pilot.
Well, and going back to what you were saying is I feel like when we sit in everybody else's business, it's incredibly narcissistic because we think that what we do and everything we say or think is affecting everybody else. And like you said, everybody comes to the table with their own junk.
Right.
Cuss today.
Not on the first episode.
My mom might be listening.
Oh, you were going to say shit, and you said junk instead. I have to make sure that there's at least one cuss word per episode, so that I can just make sure that every single one has the E explicit, because I don't want to go through and be like, was there a cuss word in this one? So it's just safer if they're just all it's laziness.
Well, I've had my share today.
But we just, yes, that's great.
I don't know, when you stick with staying in your own business and you don't get so worried about what other people think. Well, I guess, have I told you my hysterectomy idea?
Oh, here it is. No. The idea?
Right. No, so like when I get inconvenienced by somebody, like let's say I'm driving, there's just somebody really slow in front of me. And I just like, I'm in a hurry or something. I get irritated, right? Like, oh, I wish this person would drive faster. Or if I feel like you're saying something to me, like the situation you were in, and I'm choosing to get defensive about it, and I'm kind of getting all worked up by what you're saying, and I just imagine that they've just had a hysterectomy. And it's that mental shift that I need. Like, okay, Abby, have a little compassion. Like, we have no idea how they're showing up. And this is where it came from. Because it doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman, I still say that you have a hysterectomy. Because it's odd enough, but it just pulls me out of that mental spiral. So many years ago, around the time that I met you, I had a friend that had another friend that just had a hysterectomy. And so when that happens, like it totally shuts you down. I mean, they basically rip open your gut, do what they need to do. And so you're incredibly sore and you're incredibly slow. Like you can't pick things up, you can't hardly move. And so we spent weeks helping her kind of rehabilitate because she was on her own. And it kind of dawned on me like, oh my gosh, because she was driving slow and moving slow. And I just thought, okay, like I just need to be a little bit more compassionate. Like I don't know how she physically feels, but obviously it's something, right? And it's causing her this slowdown or this, and so I need to be mindful of how she's operating and just take a step back for a moment. So I just was in a time in my life where I was looking for a change, and for whatever reason, I just decided to imagine that everybody just had a hysterectomy. And so it sort of shifted me back to my business by saying, oh, okay, they just had a hysterectomy. Like, it makes me realize, like, okay, everybody brings something to the table, exactly what you're talking about. They both have their own things, whether they're a bad leader or this other guy had something going on. But they're obviously bringing that to the table when they're having that conversation with you. But so many times we're so stuck in their business that we don't see that. But when we're in our business, we can have that perspective of, okay, they have their own stuff going on. I have my own stuff going on. How can we step outside of it to just really get the message and choose to be responsive instead of reactive, which is how old Ryan sounds like he would have been, reactive.
Very much so.
Yeah.
I have a.
How does it feel to hear your own voice say those things?
Well, it was a very good reminder, and it's strange. I have another friend in this very moment that just had a real hysterectomy.
No shit.
So I was kind of giggling to myself the other day. I'm like, yep, you're slow. Because you really did have a hysterectomy. But I still love this point, and I still use it. Because I guess... Okay, here's what I wrote down. This is what I wrote down. When you are caught up in somebody else's business, it's easy to be irritable, and you're not really seeing them as they are or accepting them as they are. And so imagining, to pull yourself out of that, imagining, you know, as silly as it is, because it has to be strange and off the wall to pull you back in, imagining that they just had a hysterectomy, it sort of is that flip you need to come back to your business and just accept however they are showing up in that moment, because we have no idea what's going on with them internally. Because a lot of times what people present to us is not even on the surface, is not really what's going on underneath it all. But we only know what's going on the surface, what they're showing to us, and that's, you know, choosing to react to that is not always best case scenario. So that's just my thoughts on that.
So it's knowing that there's a thing behind the thing, knowing that you don't know what that is.
Right.
So then the hysterectomy thing gives you room to just assume that it's something heavy enough to make their behaviors understandable.
Yes.
Maybe not condonable, but at least you're filling in the blank with something that is big enough to cover their actions with compassion.
Yes. But it's incredibly tricky to do. I'm going to give you an example. So my wife has a brother. Well, she has two siblings, but her brother is married. And so my sister-in-law does not agree with our lifestyle. And has been adamant about it from the very beginning. She was raised, from what I know, okay, so I'm not sitting in her business here, but the facts that I know, she was raised in Church of Christ. I am sweating, wow. I think this is going to come back on me. Raised Church of Christ, very conservative. A lot of things in her background that she triggers me a lot is where I'm going. She triggers me a whole lot. She can make me incredibly angry. She can make me very sad. I mean, she seems to know every single button to push and can make me feel very small. There are only a handful of people in my life that can do it. She happens to be one of them. So in working with her, I had to go back to this very concept of I have to constantly imagine that she has a hysterectomy, because it's the only thing that pulls me out, because she can put me in a spiral so deep that I feel like I cannot get out of it. And so I'm telling you this because it's easy to say that and laugh about it and it's funny, but when it comes to really hard and heavy situations, it is constant practice, and it's something that's very hard to do. And so a lot of times I have to ping pong back and forth between recognizing like she's showing up this way and saying these things, and it is not my business. It is not my business to actually own what she's saying and own her feelings. She's doing the best she can. She's showing up on how she was raised, her own conditioning, her own traumas, a lot of which I really don't know. And if I look at it from that perspective, then I don't get triggered as easily. But it's not foolproof. And I guess that's kind of my point is, I think you said this once, the human experience is exhausting. And it is
something I would say.
We are constantly challenged in this way, you know, and I think that's an important point to take away from all of this today is all of this light work we're doing. It's easy to say a lot of times on the surface, but actually experiencing it can be difficult. But that's why we're here, and I think that's why we're sharing our message is we're wanting to be that cheerleader for you that it is possible. Yep, it's uncomfortable a lot of times. She still makes me incredibly uncomfortable. But if I can stay in the place of my business of just showing and accepting who she is for how she's showing up, even though it's incredibly offensive to me, I can keep, even though I have an emotion to it, I can keep my thoughts from going like wildfire and then like ruining the rest of my day or my week or whatever. So
that's so fascinating because your response to being triggered is almost the exact opposite of mine.
Okay.
Whereas yours is connective, where you're reaching further into them with grace and compassion in a way that allows you to, instead of just making yourself be okay, you're kind of creating a narrative within yourself that they're okay too. And so that what is hurtful or painful comes from a place of just being okay, and we're all okay, you know. And I worked at a place where I would just sit there behind a desk for 8 hours with headphones in, and they had these educational materials. You could just pop in a CD and listen to some self-help books or talks, or whatever. And I listened to this talk. I don't know the guy's name. I've looked it up. I've looked up the content. I have no idea who this guy was or where this talk was given. I cannot find it. But he mentioned that when he was going through a list, and one of the things he said is, when people make you angry, and then he stopped and he said, wait a second, nothing makes you angry but you. And I thought, well, that's not true. People make me angry all the time. And he created this argument that people do a thing and then you get angry or you get upset or you get hurt and you think they did that to you. But it's two completely separate events, and you got yourself angry over a thing that they did. And I remember having to, I had to pause the thing and stop what I was doing and stare at the wall to process that. And I had something similar come across my radar where someone reminded me that I could disconnect things that I thought were connected. If we're in some corporate environments, there are certain conditions where you can just fire someone on the spot, and certain conditions where you have to go through a certain protocol. And one of those protocols would be what's called a performance improvement plan, where you give someone a shot to prove that they can bring their performance where it needs to be before just firing for it. And you have to have it on record that they were unsuccessful in that plan before you can fire them for performance. And so I'm actually on one of those right now, and I'm nearing the end of it. Actually, today's the last day, and I spent this whole time thinking, if I'm unsuccessful in this, I'm going to be fired. It's a chain of events, you know. They'll have everything that they need, and they can let me go. And then I talked to a person who's a representative from the whole department that manages all of those. And so I started saying, if this happens, and this happens, and this happens, and this happens, and she's like, whoa, you're making a lot of assumptions. I said, what? Is it not safe to assume that if I'm unsuccessful on the PIP, then that means I'm going to get fired? And she goes, yeah, that's not. I mean, if you're unsuccessful on the PIP, that just means you're unsuccessful on the PIP. If they want to fire you afterwards, they have to start a whole other process to fire you. And that's a choice they have to make, and that's a whole other process. But it's not like the second you're unsuccessful on the PIP, the firing just automatically starts happening. There have been people who've been put on a plan, failed the plan, and their boss still didn't fire them in that moment. And so she says each of these is an isolated incident that are not really connected. They're just different processes that exist in the same system. And it took her telling me that to help me disconnect the two, because I thought this happened, which causes this happens, which causes this to happen. And she said, no, they're kind of isolated things, each with a start and an end, and that don't necessarily automatically lead into each other. And so my response when I'm triggered by somebody is to stop and say, okay, they did that thing, and that's the end. And if I respond to it, that's the beginning of another thing. That's not at all a chain reaction. It's not a cause and effect. It's just that happened, and then I get to choose whether or not this happens internally. And just that little switch, it doesn't make me have compassion for them. It doesn't make me justify them. It just kind of makes me detach from their whole thing.
Right.
Like they did a thing. I don't know why they did a thing. I don't know the reasoning. I don't know the rationale. Did they have a hysterectomy? Are they just an asshole? I don't know. But then there's a gap where like there's a break, and then I get to choose. I guess for me, it's acknowledging that my response is always a choice. Mm-hmm. They don't trigger me. They do a thing, and then I get triggered. Mm-hmm. Or I can choose not to be.
Right.
And that's the struggle I have. It just take them out of the equation for a second, and then figure out how I'm gonna show up, and then just own the fact that if I get really pissed off, I even don't try to use the language that they pissed me off. It's just I got pissed off, because then that brings it back on me and reminds me that it was my choice to engage with the thing that led to me getting pissed off.
The first thing that comes to mind with your method, though, is it sounds very lonely.
It is. Well, there's that old quote that you don't see people as they are, you see people as you are. And I'm starting to learn that my experience of everybody is really just my experience of myself filtered through what they bring. And so in that, I think this is coming from the same place where I'm at a point where I'm acknowledging that my experience is all my experience anyway, you know? Mm-hmm. And so it's not that I'm disconnecting from everything. I think I'm just understanding that, or I'm choosing to live in the understanding that external stimuli does not automatically spark internal processes for me. It's not, like there's always an element of me choosing to do or be or act or feel a certain way.
But without taking the other person into consideration, how does that fit into your wayfinder mentality? Because are you separating?
I think what I'm doing is I'm just giving them all the space they need to be and do what they're being and doing. And maybe that's compassion, but really it's just, it's cutting off dependence on them. If I give them the power to make me upset, I'm giving them the power to make me happy. And then all of a sudden my emotions are dependent on them. Mm-hmm. There's a guy in my life who it's very easy for him to piss me off. Well, it's very easy for me to get angry about him. And how see how that works? For me to get angry about how he does things, what he does, what he thinks, how he operates, how he just is in the world. And I don't respect the guy. I don't like him.
Does he remind you of Ray Ron?
Oh, he is Ray Ron.
Okay, that's why that makes sense.
Yes.
Because you don't like
I
Ray
really
Ron.
don't like Ray Ron.
And he embodies that.
Very much so.
Okay.
In all the same ways. Mm-hmm. And so whenever I find myself getting worked up about anything having to do with him, I could go and say, he just had a hysterectomy. Or what I used to do is I'd make excuses for him because I know his dad, I know how he was raised, I know, I have a whole bunch of reasons where I could say he really is operating the best he's using all the tools he was given. He's doing the best he can with what he was given. And that's fine. I still get pissed off because he doesn't have a lot of tools. He wasn't given a lot. He was taught a very, very toxic masculinity and taught that was okay and that's how you should be. And that's not enough to cover it for me. But if I just detach completely and say, hey, you don't have to get pissed about this. Doesn't mean you condone it. Doesn't mean you're okay with it. Doesn't mean you like it. But for you to get all fired up and where you're all jittery and your nerves are crazy and you feel it in your face, and then all of a sudden that's going to pour into every other decision you make and you're just having a bad day now, that's a choice. You don't need to respond badly to him doing things that you don't like.
That is true. But the thought that I was having as you were saying that is, then I don't know that you really dealt with Ray Ron, because you should be able to experience that, not get caught up in it, and almost be neutral about it. Mm-hmm. And if you're coming to a point where you're not neutral about it, that means that comes back to you. There's something that you potentially need to. Do you need to forgive Ray Ron? Have you forgiven Ray Ron?
Forgiving Ray Ron is a daily practice.
Okay.
Oh, but here's what I think you're digging into that I just realized. Detaching my actions from his actions really gives me the choice to act however I want, regardless of how he's acting. Example. We were all out to dinner. Me, my wife, my kid, him, his wife, their kids. And he was in a bad spot emotionally. Some things have been going on relationally between the two of them all day. And he's got a lot of buttons and she's got a lot of fingers. And so things had come to a head, and he got so angry that he just slammed his fist on the table. And I thought to myself, okay, this now has physical expression. And in that moment, I judged him so hard for being weak-minded, for giving her all that control over his emotional landscape, for losing his shit in front of the kids and everybody else. He was just so immature in that moment, in my perspective. And if I had allowed that to be a solid cause and effect pathway between his actions and my emotions, I would have just sat there on a high horse and judged him and not, that would have been it. But because I actively disconnected, and I said, okay, Ryan, you have a choice. How do you want to show up? Well, what he needs right now is someone he's all spun up and he needs to be unspun. So then I said, hey, we're going to go take a walk. He was like, oh, no. I said, we are going to go take a walk. And so he got up and he walked out, and I followed him, and we walked for a long time without saying anything. And then we ended up just standing there, and I asked him one question, and he just unloaded all this stuff. And as he was talking, I could see his tension releasing. I could see his body language changing. I could see his shoulders weren't all up like this anymore, and he was just more relaxed into it. And then his language went from here are the events to here's how I feel. And I just let him talk. And then I did this weird thing where I built him up, and I said, here are your strengths. Here are the things that I admire about you. Here are the things that you could do, that you have in you to make this a better thing. Here's what you have control over. Here's what you don't have control over. Here's some questions you can ask yourself. I just went ba 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 ba. And by the end of the conversation, he was like, he wasn't in a huff. He wasn't breathing heavily. He wasn't stomping around. He still felt defeated, and he didn't really feel empowered, but he was diffused. And all I had built into him was positive shit. And then we walked back in, and he was withdrawn, but he wasn't. She couldn't do anything to get him all fired up. He was at least more resilient.
Sure.
And I was able to do that simply because I told myself, you have a choice how you're going to show up. I did not make excuses. I didn't say, oh, here's why he's acting that way. I just said, okay, he's doing a thing. I'm not going to let it affect how I choose to show up. I'm just going to choose. And then I did.
Which is a really important point that you're making, because having compassion and, using the phrase, oh, they just had a hysterectomy, is not excusing that other person.
Right.
Like my sister-in-law, I am not excusing her behavior in any way, shape, or form. I can't even say that I'm accepting her behavior, but I am seeing it for what it is.
Giving yourself room to give her compassion. Anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
And then also being responsive and showing up the way that I want to show up, which is then going back to, okay, she's doing the best that she can.
Right, regardless of how she shows
up.
Like how you show up is not at all dependent on how she shows up.
Yes.
That's why I make that separation.
Right, yeah. You don't have to like them. It's not about excusing. And sometimes I think that's the message that comes across that I have to make very clear, is I'm not asking you to just accept them or...
Right. Brush it under the rug or make excuses.
Them anyway. That is not what we are saying.
Right.
Right.
Okay. I'm glad that got established.
Yeah. So did you put on your judgment hat at any point during that dinner? Like, did you find yourself going down that road?
I started to, but I noticed when I do that. And that's when I was like, oh, okay. You're now attached to his actions.
But then that says to me, because when our judgment is triggered, it says to me there is something about yourself that you need to deal with that you don't like.
Right.
And the things that you listed out that you were potentially going to judge him about, I wonder if there are things that you also need to deal with. Because that's what we do. We
Right.
to keep safe, we just project what we need to fix about ourselves onto somebody else when they display that behavior.
Right. There have been times recently that I've allowed my anger to just come out in full swing. And it's like when you're drunk and you're watching yourself do a thing and you don't feel like you have control over stopping it. You're just like, oh, I'm talking a lot and being really obnoxious and nobody even really wants to be around me, but I'm going to keep doing it, you know?
Right.
And there have been times very recently that I've let my anger take the wheel, kick everyone else out of the car. And I'm watching myself just shaking with very, very threatening, imposing body language, scaring people who are telling me I am scared of you right now, and just not giving a fuck because I'm operating 100% in wrath. And then watching myself and saying, this isn't your best. And so there's then, but it's kind of I'm going to feel bad about this later, because right now I'm engaged in committing to this performance, right? And I let all of the norepinephrine, I let all the adrenaline just course through my veins, all the cortisol, and just let it fuel what I think I want to do, right? And so I'm saying that very neutrally and casually, but I also really, really don't like that I showed up that way.
Right.
And so in some way I have a hard time not just immediately judging myself for allowing myself to go there. And it goes back to what you were saying. I thought I was better. I should have more tools than this. I should be able to do this in a more healthy way. And so then the fact that I don't. But
should you? Is that true? Is that a true statement?
In that moment, I didn't feel like I had any other tools.
Exactly.
Maybe I did, but they didn't feel accessible. They didn't feel within reach, or they didn't feel like they would quote unquote work. You know? And so it felt like a reaction and a choice to then engage with the reaction. Because that's what I do. I find myself in a certain mode, and then if I take a step down a path, I can then step outside of myself and say, okay, am I supposed to go down this path? And so the initial reaction is just your nervous system, your endocrine system responding to stimuli. But then once I'm there, it's always a conscious choice whether or not I stay there. I start judging him when he hits the table, and then I say, okay, do I want to keep doing this? No, I don't. I start expressing anger, and then the start, that's biological. But then taking a second step down that road is a choice.
Exactly.
And I judge myself forever making the choice to continue down what I know is not my best self. So then when I see other people, I forget that other people don't operate that way. This guy that we're talking about does not operate that way.
Right.
And so I have to remind myself, he's not choosing to go full bore asshole mode. That's just the only tool in his inbox.
Exactly.
In his inbox. Yeah. Only tool in his toolbox. And I forget that sometimes. And sometimes just reminding myself that he has nothing else at his disposal but to get angry and violent and mean and loud.
Yes. That's how I feel about my sister-in-law.
That makes it easier for me to not judge him. And it's because I judge those things in myself when I do them too. I think if I didn't have those problems, I wouldn't be judgy of those problems in other people.
Yes, exactly. But that's why anytime we have judgment, that honestly should be an opportunity to get curious. Because if you're judging somebody else, you need to take a hard look at yourself, right?
Because that's a thing in you that you're judging. Because if you didn't have to deal with it, then it wouldn't spark that and trigger it in you.
Right, but it's too vulnerable and uncomfortable to turn the mirror on ourselves. So it's easier when someone presents that to you and them. It's really easy to judge.
And because then they're the problem and you're not the problem. Exactly.
There's nothing wrong with me.
Right.
But half the battle is honestly in awareness. Because this is never going to go away, unless we go back and talk about enlightenment, which we talked about an episode or two ago. But it's going to constantly be there. And so, going back again to answer your question, where does somebody get started to reverse their thinking? I think the first key is awareness, just to be aware that you are having, like, step outside of those thoughts, like you're saying, step outside of the judgment to say, I am judging this person, and recognize that that's what you're doing, and recognize it's a way of being and thinking that you don't want to embody. And so doesn't mean you have to know what to do about it at this point. Just knowing that it's there is half the battle.
I was reading a book. I think it was Get Your Shit Together by Sarah Knight. I think that I'm like 85% sure that's accurate. I think it was that book. It may not have even been in that book, but I was reading a book where it has you do an exercise where you talk about other people negatively. It gives you a sentence like, this person is really bad with their money. This person's really bad with time management. This person's really bad. And you put names of people you know in those blanks and then read them about all those other people. All the kind of adulting problems that people could have. It lists them all out one by one. You pick someone who that fits the bill and you say, this person's really bad about this. Then you go back through and you replace all those names with yourself. And then as you read them, she asks you, which ones sparked something? When you read that thing, did it wake up your defenses? Did it say, oh, that didn't feel good to read? And then, of course, that's taking inventory of, then those are the things in you that you absolutely know you need to work on. And then chances are, if you go back, she didn't say this in the book, but if you go back and look at the names you put in those are probably people that you like the least. You know? And I was talking about my godkids to their mom. And we're not in a place where we're really interacting with them a lot. And I was just talking about how much I miss them. And there's one that I miss more than the others. And it's the one that I've always kind of favored. And she asked me why that was. And I said, honestly, I think it's because the other two kids mirror back parts of me that I've always struggled with. And that one mirrors back the parts of me I've always loved.
Interesting.
Has really nothing to do with them.
Right.
It has to do with the me that I see in them. And so going back to this guy, the me that I see in him is the only me that I actually like have a name for and have to have meetings with and have to find it within myself to have compassion for. I don't know where I was going with that.
Close proximity to your life, right?
Yes. He's not as close anymore, but there was a time. And then I actually called him I called him once because I was really angry about something that he did and I just needed to unload on him. And he yelled and I yelled and it was not fun. And then I went outside. I was at my mom's. I just sat and reflected. And I called him again and I was already crying. I did not expect to cry, but the second I opened my mouth, I started crying. And I said, I love you like a brother. And I do not take that lightly, and I don't say that to anybody. And I have let you in so far that you can hurt me very badly, very easily. And then I find myself very hurt by you. And I'm angry at you because I am hurt by you, and I'm hurt by you because I love you. That's all I needed to say. And then I went back and I thought about those words. I thought about Ray Ron. And when I was Ray Ron, that was a time in my life, it was the hardest for me to love myself. It was so hard. And that's why it's hard for me to love people who remind me of Ray Ron.
But what a beautiful lesson, really. Because Ray Ron was not operating in true north.
No, true south.
Yes. But if you're able to have compassion for this person, this man in your life, why can you not have compassion for Ray Ron?
You know what? It's not hard to have compassion for Ray Ron when I decide to have compassion for Ray Ron. But my default is contempt.
Yeah.
Every time someone says the name Ray Ron, or every time you bring it up, or every time I really realize I got to go back and deal with them, and I bring them up and we have that conversation, it always starts with contempt. And then I have to choose to turn that into compassion. It is not a habit for me to start with compassion with Ray Ron.
then that says to me you do have a lot of work left, because you should show up neutral. I say should. Damn it, there's should again. To be operating in your true north, you would show up neutral as Ray Ron.
Right. Yeah.
But you've made movement. You at least now recognize that you're showing up with contempt, and you are making the choice to operate otherwise. But true north self would be showing up even with Ray Ron and immediately having compassion.
Yeah, and like you said, I think it just comes down to self-awareness. First, you have to know. You got to know this stuff.
Yes.
You have to know this stuff about yourself.
Yes.
You have to be just equipped at the ready to be able to gut check whenever you feel yourself feeling yourself. Wait, what? Feel yourself feeling what you feel, and then know why that is and where that comes from and what part of you it's hitting on, so that when you go to do the work, you actually know what work it is you're doing. You have a compass to point you in the direction where you need to go.
Yes.
And that just comes down to asking yourself hard questions and then giving yourself the hard answers and owning the parts of yourself that's not comfortable to own. I remember, I don't really do New Year's resolutions just because I don't do resolutions. But this year I was really thinking, and I thought I have two life lessons that I'm in the middle of learning how to live out. The first is own your choices. And I didn't say own your actions because this makes the assumptions that all of your actions are your choices. So I hit the table because you made me really mad. No, I hit the table because I chose to hit the table. You did things and I chose to get mad. I chose, so you plant those little interjections along the whole timeline of the events that you watch happen in the movie of your life, right? And every single time you do a thing, you just tag on, oh, that was a choice. I made a choice there. I made a choice there. And one, that's empowering because then you really don't feel like anybody else has control over you. You never find yourself saying, I did this because you. I did this because I, right? So you own your choices. But then the second lesson was you always have a choice. There's never a time that you don't have a choice, that you don't have options, that your hands are tied. They forced my hand. I had to do this. I had to do this. I don't say have to and I don't say can't. I try not to. And if I do, I catch myself and then I rephrase it. Even down to, someone invited me on Facebook to an event, Dungeons and Dragons. And I prioritized something else and decided not to go. And I went to the Facebook thing and it was going or can't go. And I had some serious moral reservations with clicking can't go because I didn't want to say, I can't go. I can go. I'm just choosing not to. I'm choosing not to go.
Yes.
And I find myself tempted to use that language, especially when I'm telling someone that I'm making a decision I don't think they want me to make. It's immediately partnered with, here's the excuse, here's the reason, here's the systemic, logistical reason why I have to make this choice, when really it still is a choice I'm making. And so I don't say I can't. I just say I'm not. And even that one thing right there, it feels like you're planting your stake in the ground.
Right.
And it's owning the fact that, I hate telling someone I'm choosing not to hang out with you, but that's what it is.
Exactly.
And so those are the truths I'm trying to live in this year, is that I'm owning my choices. And mostly that comes out linguistically, the way I'm rephrasing the way that I talk about them. And then also just acknowledging that I always have a choice. At no point, if I ever find myself saying, oh, that's just what it is, my hands are tied, I have to live with reality. No, that's something I learned to do as a coping mechanism when I was being physically abused by an angry father.
Right.
I didn't feel like I had a choice, but I did. And I still do. And so self-awareness, those gut checks, understanding that your actions are your choices, not anybody else's, that you always have a choice. I feel like that's a pretty solid toolkit for doing the kind of work that we're trying to do. Very
much so, yes. And I wanted to touch on the tool that you used from the book. It is Sarah Knight, by the way.
I
don't know if it's that book.
Oh.
That tool was in that book, but Sarah Knight did write.
We also need to interview her.
Yeah. But I use a very similar method in my work as well, where it's a judgment worksheet and then you turn it on yourself. It's a metaphor tool is what we call it in coaching. But then I use that to work with the neuroplasticity to rewire that thinking. And that's exactly what you are doing. You are rewiring your brain. So instead of saying I can't, you are rewiring it as I have a choice. And so that's kind of the place where I start, is we look at that, how you're judging other people, how you feel about other people. We turn it on you, shed some light, and then rewire it. Tricky work, but it works. Anyway.
Anyway,
And there
just
we
some
go.
stuff.
Yeah, just
Is that our time? Are we done already?
Actually, yes.
Did we actually debrief anything at all?
We debriefed.
Did we? Oh, we did the hysterectomy
we did.
thing.
In this one, we actually got my hysterectomy metaphor. Yeah, so we did.
And right after that was me telling the story about how I peed in the car.
Yes. So for next part 1,
Part 1 of sitting 3.
we will let you in on that. Yeah.
Oh, and I have a sign off, but I can't say it until we get to a certain point in the podcast.
Okay.
So we're just gonna have to be sign offless until then.
All right.
But it's pretty good.
Okay. Well, that's fine. We will be sign offless then. Today. No, it was great to catch up with you. Good stuff today.
Yeah, I feel like we did a lot of actual, real, meaningful work.
We did.
In ourselves.
Yes, in ourselves.
I hope somebody else got something out
Yeah,
of
right?
this.
I was going to say, and thank you, listeners, for listening in on our conversation.
Abby and Ryan coach each other.
Yes, but we hope it is relatable in some way.
Probably.
Yeah. It is.
See you in
81 listens.
Part 1 of the next one.
Time. Okay. See you.
Oh, how do I stop this?